Okay, but if Mr. Slider's not claiming that he used the science of statistics, then your opinions don't offer any criticisms of Mr. Slider's opinions or conclusions because he's talking about something completely different, right?
Form.
If Mr. Slider is not appealing to the science of statistical theory, or if anyone else who is commenting or using Mr. Slider's report is not claiming to base their opinions on extrapolation using statistical science, then I agree that they would not be particularly interested in my opinion that I have got in the summary here.
Okay. So if that's the case, that Mr. Slider didn't base his opinions on the science of statistics or statistical sampling, then your criticisms of Mr. Slider's opinions in this case wouldn't be helpful to evaluating Mr. Slider's conclusions or opinions. Is that right?
Form.
You mentioned my criticisms of Mr. Slider's opinions. I'm not sure I am criticizing Mr. Slider's opinions. If he is expressing an opinion based upon statistical theory and statistical inference, then I probably would criticize it because it would contradict the opinions I have.
During your testimony a moment ago, you said that if we're not using the field of statistics, that an engineer can have an opinions concerning untested locations following ASTM E2128, right?
Well, I think what I said was if an engineer is not claiming to be basing their opinions on the theory of statistics, then they are expressing engineering opinions, which other engineers can agree or disagree with.
Isn't that what Mr. Slider did in this case?
It may well be.
Is the converse of that also true, that you couldn't provide any criticisms of engineering opinions because you're not an engineer?
If an engineer is expressing an opinion and claiming that statistical theory provides a basis for those, then I would certainly be able to comment on that using my statistical expertise. If an engineer is expressing an engineering opinion and is not claiming to use any statistical theory, then that would in general be outside of my area of expertise. But other engineers could look at it and agree or disagree with it.
In your report, you wrote that you needed to have a sampling plan in order to have a technically valid extrapolation, right? A properly constructed sampling plan.
Well, on page 5 in the summary, I talk about a scientifically valid extrapolation based upon the theory of statistical inference, and you do need to have a certain kind of sampling plan or sampling that would allow you to have that scientifically valid extrapolation.
Well, so what you added that's not here to that phrase you just gave was based on the theory of statistics, right? Nowhere did you limit your report to if they're saying that they're basing it on the theory of statistics, right?
When I say extrapolation in my report or scientifically valid extrapolations, I mean based upon the theory of statistical inference.
Okay. Can you have a scientifically valid, well, let me ask, are there other fields of science other than statistics?
Yes.
Okay.
Form.
Can there be scientifically valid extrapolations that don't use the field of statistics to reach their conclusions?
Form.
You can certainly make an extrapolation without claiming statistical theory as a basis, and then anyone else could look at what basis you are using as a justification for your extrapolation and agree or disagree with it.
Okay. Now, the ASTM E2128 standard that we just went over also talks about how you don't have to test every location on a building in order to evaluate whether or not those same conditions exist on uninspected or untested locations, right?
I don't recall whether it specifically says that.
Well, look at section 5.3.3 again.
Would you like me to do that?
Sure.
I agree in 5.3.3 it says the applicability of findings to similar uninspected or untested locations of on the building.
Okay. So using ASTM E2128, an engineer can have a scientifically valid opinion concerning untested or uninspected locations.
Form.
Well, it depends what you mean by scientifically valid. Any engineer can have an opinion on uninspected and untested locations for whatever reason they want, and other engineers can ask why and agree or disagree with them.
But you couldn't say that just because Mr. Slider didn't use random sampling or statistics to evaluate the conditions of the building envelopes, that he could not have scientifically valid opinions concerning uninspected or untested locations, right?
I'm saying
Form.
that he doesn't have a basis for scientifically valid extrapolations based on the theory of statistics.
Mr. Slider didn't use statistics and he didn't use random sampling. So what value do your opinions have in this case then?
Form.
I agree that I've not seen evidence that Mr. Slider had random sampling plans. I mean, he is using statistics in the general scope of that word. And my opinions are that, as I've explained in my report, his data tells you about the items inspected, but there's no basis for extrapolation based upon the theory of statistical inference.
And Mr. Slider didn't claim to use the theory of statistical inference as the basis for his opinions, right?
I don't recall him doing that.
Okay, so without Mr. Slider doing that, do your opinions have any value or thing to add in this case?
Form.
I think my opinions would be of interest to anyone who is wondering whether there's a basis for extrapolations based upon the theory of statistical inference.
Okay, and if Mr. Slider's not doing that, then what value is there of asking that question?
Form.
That would be for other people in this case to answer whether my opinions are useful to them or not. Opinion of his.
Aren't all of Mr. Slider's opinions that he provided engineering opinions?
That
Form.
may well be the case.
Okay. Well, Mr. Slider's an engineer, right?
I agree.
Okay. So, given that Mr. Slider is an engineer, would Mr. Slider be in a better position to determine whether his opinions are scientifically valid using the field of engineering to extrapolate his opinions concerning the findings from tested and inspected locations to uninspected and untested locations?
If
Form.
Mr. Slider is expressing engineering opinions, then those opinions could be agreed with or disagreed with by other engineers.
And not by you?
I would not specifically have an opinion about an engineering opinion unless it was in some way claiming to be related to statistics in some way.
So why do we have a report from you at all in this case, given that Mr. Slider nowhere in his report or his deposition claimed that he was using the field of statistics?
Form.
You have a report from me because Mr. Valentas' law firm requested my report.
Okay.